Hello and welcome to Apparitions and Alibis. I'm your host, AJ Stallman. What's up? How's it going? How you doing? It's been raining nonstop here and it's so murky and just blah. There's also been horrible flooding, so I hope wherever you are safe and dry and comfortable. Speaking of being wherever you are from, I just saw that we had our first Australian listener. Hi, listener! It's so amazing and I'm so excited that this little podcast has made it somewhere so far away. But let's get down to business. True crime. Today, I will be talking about the Spotsylvania killer, aka Richard Marc Evonitz. I have my coffee, I have my dogs, I have my brookie. Let's do this. Warning, this episode contains graphic details and mentions of rape and abuse. Richard Marc Evonitz was born July 29, 1963 in Columbia, South Carolina to Joseph and Tess Evonitz. He was the oldest of three. Kristen was born in 1968 and Jennifer was born in 1971. Growing up, he was called Mark, which is how I'll be referring to him in this episode. He also graduated high school at age 16. The Evonitz home wasn't the happiest of homes. Joseph and Tess separated twice, once when Mark was a baby and then again when he was around 12. But it wasn't until 1985 when they finally divorced. Joseph and Tess met in New York, where he was stationed at Fort Jackson, where Tess worked at the Army base. Joseph worked as a draftsman for sign companies and later a taxi driver. He was also a heavy drinker. Tess would recall that he would often drink until he passed out, and that when he would get up, he would be even worse. Joseph, on the other hand, remembers it differently, saying he drank on weekends but did not pass out and was never an alcoholic. He did admit that he would belittle his family, calling them morons. Mark bore that share of abuse. Two incidents between Joseph and Mark piqued the police interests. Remember these for later. One incident is claimed that Joseph actually drowned Mark's dog in front of him. Joseph states that it isn't true. The children adopted strays from the street regularly, and Joseph had taken one to the pound. Mark told a family member once that when he was 6, Joseph tried to drown him. Some family members say it was in a wading pool during a cookout when Mark splashed water on the hamburgers. Others say it happened in the bathtub. However, Joseph described the incident as a minor thing that Mark misinterpreted. Joseph claims that when Mark was little and in the bath, he kept yelling about the water going into his eyes. So Joseph took a bunch of water and dumped it on his head. Mark was frightened and never forgot the experience. Both mother and father of Mark had affairs that the children knew about. Joseph once enlisted Mark to deliver messages to the neighbor with whom he was having an affair. After high school, Mark worked briefly as a manager at a Jiffy Lube before joining the United States Navy. He served as a sonar technician and received a Good Conduct Medal before being honorably discharged after 8 years of service. Following the Navy, Mark worked steadily at businesses that sold compressors and grinding equipment. He filed for bankruptcy in 1997, unable to keep up with bills following a divorce, and had his home foreclosed on in 1999 following a failed business venture. Mark was married twice. First to Bonnie Lou Gower from 1988 to 1996, then to former Hope Marie Crowley from 1999 until 2002. Mark and Bonnie married when he was 25 and in the Navy. She was 17. Bonnie had been Mark's neighbor and a friend of his sister's. They had known each other since Bonnie was in 6th grade. There was a photo taken of the children dancing in the living room when Bonnie was still in middle school. In the picture, there's an arm touching Mark's arm. Bonnie wanted the photo to remember Mark by because it was her arm touching him. Soon there was wedding photos. Bonnie married Mark in Columbia, South Carolina in 1988. The couple moved to California and Maine while he was stationed in the Navy. Soon after discharge in 1993, they moved to Fredericksburg, Virginia. They chose there because members of Mark's family lived there and because Virginia would honor Bonnie's California cosmetology license and South Carolina would not. In 1996, they paid roughly $125,000 for a new home in the South Oaks division. 5 months later, Bonnie was preparing to leave her husband. See, she had met a man online from California and wanted to move there. Her mother and brother also lived in California. Bonnie visited early September 1996 and returned a week later to pack her bags and move permanently in November. Mark was devastated. After Bonnie had moved from their new home, Mark could no longer pay the bills. It was in 1999 when Mark met his second wife, Hope Crowley. He was 36 and she was 17. They met when she waited on him at Aunt Sarah's pancake house. His mother and sister were out with Mark for that breakfast. When Mark flirted with Hope, his sister encouraged her to go out with him. When Hope turned 18, she moved out of her parents' home and moved in with Mark. They married soon after. Mark's relationships with his wives were complex, just like the relationship with his family. It is believed that his wives satisfied something for him. Maybe they played a role, shaving, playing games, letting him be daddy to them. He even had it to where they shaved each other's private parts. It's been told of a rape fantasy that Mark played with Bonnie. He would ask her to dress up like a young girl, and then he would actually force his way into their apartment and act like he was raping her. A part of problems within his marriages was that once his wife got older, he would lose interest in them. He wanted them to not only dress younger, but to act younger as well. The former Boy Scout and Little Leaguer became a drinker and started smoking at age 12. He started using marijuana at age 13. He was brilliant, but he had problems at home and a bad temper. He would violate curfew and also break into neighbors' homes, but every time he got in trouble, his mother would come and bail him out. Mark was much closer to his mother's and sisters than his brother. When Hope moved from Virginia to Columbia, South Carolina in 1999, they actually lived with Mark's sisters and were married in the sisters' home. With having two young wives, there seems to be a specific interest of his. Does this in turn apply to his victims as well? After Bonnie had moved out of their home and Mark could no longer pay the bills, he filed bankruptcy in federal court in April 1997 and had to meet with his creditors in Richmond. On May 1st, 1997, his court hearing took place. When it ended, Mark climbed into his 1992 Ford Taurus and drove to Spotsylvania. At 3:20 p.m., he pulled into a driveway on Blockhouse Road. He had looked at the house and was interested in the two girls living there, Kristen and Katie Lisk. Whatever emotions he was feeling when he left the courthouse, whether it be humiliation, inadequacy, anger, or other, was gone when he forced the two Lisk sisters into his trunk. Now he was in control. This wasn't the first time for Mark with illegal actions. In January 1987, Mark exposed himself and masturbated in front of a 14-year-old girl in Orange Park, Florida. He was arrested a month later when he returned to port, pleading no contest, and was sentenced to 3 years probation. In 1994 and 1995, he was suspected of abduction and rape, as well as a second rape in Virginia. In September 1996, Mark abducted 16-year-old Sophia Silva from their front yard near L'Oreal Park in Spotsylvania County. She was last seen doing her homework on the front steps of her family's home shortly after arriving home from school. She seemed to be taken quietly and without a struggle. In fact, her older sister was inside the home at the time and unaware of her sibling's situation. Despite efforts, it seemed as though Sophia had vanished into thin air. Her body was found a month later in a marsh off State 3 in King George County, nearly 20 miles away. She was found wrapped in a white cover with her pubic hair shaved off. And then, as stated previously, the List sisters were abducted from their front yard on May 1st, 1997. Kristen was 15 and Katie was 12 when they disappeared after getting off their respective school bus routes. Their father came home from work sometime later to find no sign of his daughters except Kristen's book bag laying discarded in the front yard. Their bodies would be found 5 days later in the South Anna River near Old Ridge Road in Hanover County, 40 miles from their home. Like Silva, their killer had shaved their pubic areas at some point during their forced confinement. It was apparent that police were dealing with the same person. All three had been abducted from their front yard, and all had their pubic hair shaved by the killer. All had been strangled or suffocated, and all were dumped in water. It was also noticed it seemed the girls were made to take a bath before being killed. One girl had water in her lungs, which did not match the body of water at the crime scene. But it was no surprise when the DNA from both crime scenes matched. On June 4th, 2002, Mark abducted a 15-year-old girl named Kara Robinson from her friend's front yard in Columbia, South Carolina. He took her to his apartment, raped her, and tied her to his bed. While he slept that night, the victim was able to free herself. She escaped and was able to identify her attacker to the police. It was during the subsequent search of the abductor's apartment that it was found he was no first-time offender. A footlocker was opened and found to contain what seemed to be items that could be considered trophies. Among the items found were newspaper articles about the Silva and List cases, and it was soon discovered that Mark had lived in the areas of the abductions at the time and had a criminal record from earlier. It took until late August for a forensic team to confirm what investigators already knew. Mark had stalked and murdered Silva and the Lisk sisters. Mark's wives were curious about the blue trunk, but never opened it. Hope, Mark's second wife, told her husband she wanted to know what was in the metal trunk. He would not discuss it with her. She stated that they had a couple of fights about the footlocker. Fiber from items in Mark's apartment matched many of those found on the girls' three bodies. Kristen Lisk's handprints were lifted from inside of Mark's car trunk, and DNA samples were a match. Authorities suspect Mark killed since the murders of the List sisters and believe he may have been responsible for the unsolved slaying of Alicia Reynolds in Culpeper, Virginia in 1996. Handwritten directions that seemed to lead to Reynolds' dump site were found in the footlocker. Mark has lived in Virginia, South Carolina, California, and Florida, not to mention his many travels during an 8-year enlistment with the Navy. He is also a suspect in many rapes, including one that occurred in Spotsylvania in the mid-90s. The heroic South Carolina girl who escaped from his clutches and put police on his tail has become a deserving recipient of a $150,000 reward for helping solve the Lisk and Silva murders. Kara wanted to be his downfall. Mark's final victim escaped her 18-hour nightmare with one ambition: to see her captor's face in a courtroom. I wanted to go to trial and let him see me and know I was his downfall, the 15-year-old girl said TV show America's Most Wanted. Picking me, that was the greatest mistake of his life. She also stated the emotions she had for the other victims' families. My family got me back. The others will never get their girls back. The teenager told horrible details about her ordeal in her first media interview. He put me in a plastic container in the back seat and stopped after 10 or 25 minutes and put handcuffs on me. She also stated he put a rope around her neck and a wad of paper towels in her mouth as a gag. He drove to his apartment and carried and slid the container, with her still inside, upstairs to his apartment. He raped her for hours after telling Kara he wouldn't hurt her as long as she did what she was told. When the sexual assault stopped, Mark began to play house. He did the dishes and wiped down counters and vacuumed. The victim offered to sweep the floor for him in order to gain his trust, but when it came time for bed, she was tied up again. The girl was handcuffed and her legs were shackled, her arms and feet tied with rope to a restraint system on the bed. When she heard Mark snoring, she untied the rope and snuck out of the house, still in her hands and leg cuffs. Mark fled after finding her gone, ending up surrounded by police in Florida. On June 27, 2002, Mark was surrounded by police. He was urged to surrender, but kept a pistol in his hand until a police dog was released. After being bitten multiple times, Mark turned his gun onto himself and was declared dead at 10:52 p.m. His remains were cremated by his family, and they scattered them over the Sedulla River. Kara Robinson is now a police officer. In order to keep Sophia Silva's memory alive, her family established the Sophia Silva Scholarship Fund. It is awarded annually to a graduating senior from area schools who embody her same fun-loving Christian spirit. If you want to help contribute to her scholarship, they do have a GoFundMe page you can donate to. And that is the case of Richard Marc Evonitz. I want to know why the wives didn't open the footlocker. I'm too nosy. You can't tell me to not look somewhere and expect me to listen to you. And high five to Kara Robinson. Talk about badass. With Mark's childhood traumas dealing with water, I wonder if that's why water played a part in the murders. I bet his father feels like crap. Thank you so much for listening. Please follow us on Instagram at Apparitions and Alibis for all future episodes and updates. And if you're feeling spicy, make sure to follow us and rate us on any podcast listening app you're using. I'll talk to you later for a spooky tale. Peace out.